Herzlich willkommen zu unserem ersten Modellbau-Koenig Spezial. Heute behandeln wir das Sommerfest 2017. Neben Bier, Bratwurst, super Sonderangeboten hatten wir auch einen sehr bekannten Modellbauer, den Michael Rinaldi, vielen bekannt von den Büchern Tankart aus der Serie. Ja, und der Michael, der hat uns die Vorzüge und die Umgangsweise oder Umgangsweisen mit den Farben näher gebracht. Und dazu würde ich euch gerne einladen, dass ihr euch den Bericht oder den Review dann gerne mal anguckt.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me here today at this event. If I speak too fast, please just raise a hand, ask me to repeat something, because sometimes when I talk English I can get going pretty quickly, but other than that, I think we'll have a nice fun time here. I'm going to be doing an airbrushing demonstration this morning using the new Mission Models Urethane Acrylic paints from the US. I had a small hand in development and I did the graphic design for them, but it's not my company, they're not my paints, but I did help create them and kind of drive them in the right directions and stuff like that to you know, work with this kind of stuff. So one of the things that happens, or has happened, as we all know, we have a lot of paints to choose from, obviously in the hobby, going back to the classic Japanese brands of Gunzi and Tamiya. Been using them a lot, you know, lately. A lot of heavy chemicals, lacquer thinners, enamels. Health reasons, I think it takes its toll on you. You know, when you spray a lot of the lacquer thinner stuff, when we do the Tamiya paints and we thin them with lacquer thinner, these kinds of things over time, you know, the enamel weathering products as well, I've kind of shifted away from that. So these are all water-based. They won't smell, so I can do a whole demo with you guys today, and there's not going to be any odors or, you know, offensive chemicals and stuff like that. And that's kind of was an important thing to me personally. So I was really happy when these were developed, and they're water-based. In the chemical conversation, some of you guys that are, you know, if you don't pay a lot of attention to the paints, Tamiya Gunzi acrylic lacquers, Mr. Paint from Slovakia as a lacquer acrylic. It's an automotive lacquer acrylic, so those are pretty harsh chemicals, technically speaking, but they spray well. They spray beautifully, as do enamels. Enamels are the classic one. They spray great. But the acrylics, the vinyl and the latex acrylics, you know, AK, Ammo, Vallejo, Life Color, that they dry a certain way, and there's certain things that happen with them. What a urethane acrylic is paint's basically plastic and a polymer and then a binder inside here. And then the vinyls, latex, and urethanes are your plastics that you purchase as a chemical manufacturer, and the urethanes are the highest quality you can buy. So that was kind of one of the things when this kind of popped up on my radar. This would be, you know, let's get into this. Let's see what we can do with it. And so the company, I used to work for them about 10 years ago. They make a lot of tools, the etch mates, some other stuff that they made a couple of years ago. But they're back with paints, and so I was kind of asked to participate. And then after testing it for a little while, found out the paints actually work really well. And today I'll be, you know, showing you some stuff with that. The difference between this paint and a lot of the other paints too is usually when we talk about like the authors, when you read in the magazines, you know, when you spray your you know, 20% thinner, 50% thinner, it just look like milk. Make it look like the consistency of skim milk or something like that. The Mission Model stuff is a much more precise system. So, and there's inside each one is if I can even notice it. Inside each one is this these little caps have an eyedropper in them too, so you can squeeze out precise amounts. And that's different to a lot of other paint brands. And I'll talk about that more as we get into it. The reason they do that is it's a two-part system. The paints were developed from a company that has a lot of history with illustration and graphic designers. So the airbrushing of those have to be really precise. You know, even from like the nail painters to the custom car painters, the motorcycle painters and stuff like that do the big Harley Davidson tanks and airbrush work and all that stuff. That's kind of where the history of this company comes from that manufactures it. So they're designed to spray really well out of the gate. And then we had them coordinate the military colors and then the opacities for scale modeling and some of the stuff that we look for when we do our stuff. So that's kind of, and they've got the shaker thing in the bottle. They need to be shaken really well. because they will separate. Like you'll see the colors separate if they sit for a little bit. You'll see the color separation. So it's a good idea to give them a good shake. And then they have a primer set up too. They have 4 or 5 different primer colors. Today we'll use the mouse and we'll do some red primer and then some late war Dunkelgelb as kind of a general 2-tone colors. I'll do some chipping just real quick, just kind of show you some chipping as well with some chipping fluid. And then later this afternoon we'll do some weathering also. But just want to show you real quick. This Hetzer here is the Mission Models red primer with their late war Dunkelgelb on top. And I'm able to spray this really quickly, and I'm able to get to work on the weathering and the chipping and all the stuff that I like to do quite quickly with no varnishes. The spray quality is, if you're used to spraying Tamiya's with the lacquer thinners and you've seen that type of spray quality, these acrylics with their thinners spray just as well. So eliminating the lacquer thinner was kind of an important thing to me. And if any of you guys have really sprayed lacquer thinner to any large degree, you know it's not fun. You know, you got to wear the breather, you got to have the vent out the room. You know, the house stinks, the garage smells. So these spray to that level without that type of stuff. And that to me puts it above the other acrylics that are out there as far as the quality of the airbrushing. It doesn't clog the brush as much. The tip drying is really minimal. I mean, it will happen, but the tip drying in the first 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, minimal. So that's, you know, if you sprayed Vallejos a lot and you're constantly cleaning the airbrush every 5 minutes and those kinds of things, this is nice. It's a lot less of a headache, put it that way.
One question, what's the difference between the primer and the paint itself? How are they different?
This particular primer, the aerosol primers like the Gunzi, the Mr. Surfacers, they're all mixed in, they're all pre-mixed and all that stuff. Well, this is, the primer needs to be activated by the thinner. It's a chemical activation process. And so then when that chemical, when it cures, it's attached to the plastic and it's good for metal, wood, resins, a lot of resins, and it will cover photo etch as well. And so this process of the double, because this primer in particular has to be used with this, and it's a chemical process, and it's designed to be a chemical process. So if you use this primer, you have to at least get the thinner. You can't thin it with Tamiya thinner or the other, because there's a chemical in this that activates the primer setup on this to let it cure properly. So that's part of that. The air pressure, for me, I use PSI, so I usually do about 15 PSI. I spray pretty low. I spray a fairly low pressure PSI. Sometimes I'll go up to 20, but most of the work you see today will be 15 to maybe 18. And then when I want to do really, really fine line stuff, which I'll show you as well, I drop it down to about 10 or 12. So this stuff, because, okay, so there's the latex, the vinyl acrylics. The pigments, chemically, the microns of it are larger. The urethanes are much, much finer, so which is why it doesn't clog the tips, and you can spray really fine. So this paint you can really work down to almost freehand airbrush camo in like 70-second scale if you wanted to, with some practice. So that's pretty serious when you're talking about, like Tamiya with lacquer thinner, you can spray freehand camo really nicely, or the enamels really nicely. This can get to that level, so I like that part, which is nice too. And I've got some tape too, so I'll do some masking. We'll do some splinter camo, do some quick stuff as well. So gives me about 10 minutes of talking and I get going. It was a long flight yesterday. Apologize. So I'm going to count with the eyedroppers. You can count out the drops. I put 20 in here just now, and then I can put, the ratio is technically 10 drops, 2 drops of the thinner, maybe 3. It's kind of that little window to it, usually by the temperature of the weather. It's pretty wet and cool today, so I'm going to go with the straight up 2 drops. So I've put in 20, so I'm going to put in 4 drops of thinner. And the same thing too, the thinner has the dropper thing, which is nice, so you can be very precise. There's wiggle room. It has to be hyper specific, but I like to tell people when you're first trying it out, stick to the ratio, stick to the recipe. Get it to work that way, the way we talk about it first, and then you can play with it and do your thing with it, because you can over thin it for certain things. You can make really thin translucent layers, fine lines. You can do a couple things. So This is the boring part, I'm sorry. And you can see right away, are we getting all that? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Coverage is good. And there's nothing fancy. I mean, there's nothing I'm doing that's, you know, this is just straight up putting some primer down. There is, I'm starting to discover, there's a little bit of, so you're familiar, I use a lot of the hairspray with the chipping and stuff like that, where you do all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that this paint has in the first curing period of time, I'd say the first day, maybe 2 days, where I can actually scrub it with the brush and water without any hairspray, and I can get some kind of really soft gradations, and this is something you'll probably have to come up and look at really closely, where it's, I don't want to say erasable paint or distempered paint, you know, it's not like the washable whitewash paints, but it has a little bit of ability to kind of work with you to do certain effects if you're into kind of real subtle wear and tear, especially for aircraft and stuff like that. That can be kind of a really nice thing. Most of the stuff I show you is kind of heavier chipping and stuff like that, but when we get in, this is all, by the way, this is all Mission Models paints here, these little robot legs. Some of the chipping I was able to get with this, because like I said, the pigments are so much finer in the paint itself, the chipping becomes finer. And if you've read any of the books, you'll know that I'm obsessed with really small chips, you know, so like the smaller we can get this down, that's an important conversation, because this is 1/144th scale, which is, you know, this is 35th scale, so a chip in 35th scale is going to be different than a chip in 1/144th scale, just because the sheer size of the subject is changing on you. So you want to have a paint that is capable of giving you the kind of marks and wear and tear marks that we have, so we can kind of, you know, do our thing, if you will. And then I'm starting to weather, and this is a conversation we'll go later in the day, but as this is going, I've started to weather an entire section all the way through, all the way to 100%. And what I'm doing now, traditionally, for example, when we write an article, the authors, you know, the professional guys, we do a pin wash over the whole model, and we deal with that. And then we do a filter. We do all the steps we do is one step, one step, one step, and we do it over the whole thing, usually. What I'm starting to do is I'm starting to do all of the steps with the oil paints right in the whole thing and get it all the way done. And now what this does is, this shows me what's going to happen, number one. It also is really cool, number two, because you don't have to wait for all these steps to happen over. And if you're working and you have life and family and you only get a little bit of time at the workbench, that's important, because if we do a pin wash and then a month later you come back, you've got to kind of start in your head with the next step of weathering. So here, I get it all done in a couple of hours. Actually, I can do it really, like I could probably do all of this in maybe a half hour, 45 minutes at the bench. Well, now I can come back to the model and I'm excited because this looks really cool. Now I see this stuff, like I see how all is. And I can kind of, you know, that exhaust there, like when you get up really close, there's a lot of really cool little effects on it and stuff like that I've put into it really fast in a short period of time. And then the rest of this, I can kind of use this as my guide as I go to this section, to this section, to this section. And I kind of do that all the way around the model now, versus, you know, pin wash, filter, you know, decals, markings, chips, all this stuff. It's all happening in one small section. And so what's happened is mentally, this is all changed now. So for example, this is another way to look at it, is I've painted, you know, the robot legs of this thing, and they sit there, and I do my hairspray chipping, so it's got all that in it, and they sit there. And then over here, I've done all the weathering on this one with the oil paints, and I can see the rust and the pigments and some of the other stuff. And I can put that down, and I can come back to this guy in a month, and I can see what I've done here. So with the same, you know, with the oil palettes only. And so I can use this as kind of my reference guide for myself. Okay, well, I did this there, and this there, and this there, which is fine. And now I can kind of maneuver it, if you will. I can tell you a story. Maybe this leg is been more beat up or less beat up, or so I can get some asymmetrical weathering in these things. So that idea is kind of really radically changed how I really approached, you know, for example, if I'm going to do the whole mouse, I've done demos where I've done the whole section because we want to see all the different steps. And then in my head, as I'm doing the demos, I'm like, that's a pretty cool idea, actually. Like that actually is a really nice, effective way to go. So here I can just, you know, do all this stuff, And so when I come over to this side, this fender, I've got a really good idea of what's going to happen, which is, I think, a really nice kind of, it's more subtle. It gives you a little bit more control, you know, and I talk about that a lot, where if you're going on a competition table and you're really looking at the medal winners and who's really winning these things and who's doing this and who's doing that, being in control with the brushes and the techniques is going to be almost the single most important thing that's going to happen with you guys, as far as elevating to the next level, you know, improving and so on and so forth. So by working this all the way through, mentally I go A, B, C, D, I go all my stuff all the way through here, and that's like a, I don't know, when you're done you kind of breathe a nice fresh of air, and you know, you kind of, that was cool, and then I can see this and I'm like, okay, now I'm really motivated, you know, for the next level, for the next time I sit down. And I'm not saying it's like the perfect way, but what I like to think is that it's a nice change of pace. If we're used to doing things step by step by step by step, and we read this all the time, when you switch it up and kind of do it all in one little section, which we'll do this afternoon, it's kind of a lot of fun. And so this is purely just to show you how it airbrushes. I'm not going for color right now. When you're talking about being able to do this with an airbrush with a line of paint, you know, those of you that like night fighters and all that kind of stuff, I mean, I could write my name with this if I wanted to, and there's almost no overspray. So that's really hard to do with a lot of paints. I'm going to tell you that right now. You try to do that with a Vallejo, a life color, to do what I just did that quickly, that's hard to do. Now you could do it with enamels and the lacquer thinners, no problem. But an acrylic paint, to do that out of the thing, where this brush is fairly dirty, I'll be honest with you. You saw me use the red primer, I cleaned it, and now I'm using this. So I'm cranking on this for myself. Like if I was doing the books, I'm going to clean the snot out of this thing. I'm going to really make it nice. So I'm not trying to impress anybody, but this is... And I'm using a fairly high pressure, you know, I'm not even adjusting things, so it's spraying beautifully, which is nice. And this is a big beast of a model too. This is a big slab of steel that you're painting, so it's... So you can see I'll lay down a pretty thin coat, and it's drying almost immediately. It's not super wet. I'm going pretty fast. My air pressure is fairly high. I'm saying I'm probably spraying around 20 psi right now. Back home, I'd probably make some adjustments a little bit with this. In fact, let me turn it down a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to start adding a little bit more opaque layer. And because it's a little bit cooler today, usually what I do is I would have a hair dryer. I use a hair dryer a lot. There's no reason to wait for paint to dry. There really is none. So that's drying pretty nice though. We're going good. And I'm just laying it down real thin right now. And again, I can, you know, there's almost no tip drying going on yet at all. And if you guys, again, you know, that conversation with a lot of other brands, you're already starting to clean the tip. You know, oftentimes. So you know, a lot of guys that are new to airbrushing, they're like this, you know, doing this. Learn to get in a little bit, reduce your air pressure, reduce the distance. Control precision is kind of my theme now. You'll hear that a lot. You know, get in tight, get in close, go a little bit slower, you know, slow it down a little bit. And I'm just trying to lay some color fast so this demonstration looks a little more exciting. Long swatch of the color. This is a big model. I haven't played with, you know, the Hetzer's nice and small, and I mean, you can see 35th scale. That's, you know, nothing. The You forget how big the mouse really is. But you can see right here, you know, I'm kind of going pretty fast, but coverage is still nice. Whoops. All right, there's a little bit of a miss. So I got too close and sprayed too fast. So I'll let that kind of do its thing, and we'll come back and fix that. Fixing things too is a big deal. You know, if you make mistakes and how that goes, and you know, knowing how to like that happen. So just right now, leave it alone. Let it level out. Let it dry all the way, and you can kind of come back to it. So. Try to get a nice. I'll try to make this back end here really nice and opaque.
Is it drying completely flat, or is it?
It will dry matte, yeah. So what I want to do is I want to get this to dry matte, and then I'm going to, so they offer the poly additive, which is a new thing for us. Again, this comes from the automotive guys, the car world. Polyurethane additive, the purpose of this is multiple. It is kind of a lubricant, so it reduces the tip drying even more. So if you add a drop or two of this to the paint mix and say you're spraying in a hot climate or dry climate, a drop or two of this does help with that. It also cures to a stronger shell, so it's for that if you want more protection. And the third thing is it gives you a nice satin finish when you spray it right. So when I think personally, because this is new to me too, the aircraft guys out there, this will give you a smooth enough finish out of the bottle with this stuff added to it. You can skip the whole future thing and layer it on the future for decals and all that stuff.
Really?
Yeah. So on the robot legs here, the light gray is straight paint, and then the orange has a couple drops of the poly. And when you get up close, you'll see kind of a nice smooth. Yeah, you can see just the sheen. So that when I talk about no varnishes, you know, that's a thing. The most common question guys ask me is, Michael, how come you don't use varnish? You can touch it fine. One, varnishes are just another step in the process. And anytime you airbrush a varnish or spray varnishes, it's a higher risk product anyway. Okay, this is nuts. I don't know if you guys can see that. Like, and I'm just using this as a demo just to show you. Like how? That's the width of a pencil. There's no spit, there's no overspray. That was a color change on the fly. You know, I barely cleaned the airbrush. So I think what you guys are seeing is that's a pretty serious, that's what we're talking about. The finer pigments, the urethane acrylic is a much higher quality of a product. You know, and I'm in Germany, man. High quality products are your thing, right? I mean, this is the deal. So, you know, I don't want to talk shit, but this isn't Chinese crap. You know what I mean? I don't want to. This is nice stuff. So. So I'm going to lay down a really to the airbrushing to how let's talk about I'm just trying to get a little bit of color down. I'm not trying to lay it on thick right away. I just want to get a little bit of color down. And this is kind of a nice thin misting coat of paint right now. I haven't even changed the air pressure. We're still at like whatever we're at. We're pretty high, around 20. I build this up real slow. No reason to rush this at all. So pretending I'm kind of freehanding soft edge camo right now. This is kind of my outline. I go in real slow, just kind of fill it in a little bit. And this is going to be a common. And I want you guys to come up later when this is done and look at the overspray, or lack of overspray if you will, on the outer edge of this green. No, I'm not getting it super perfect. We're running out of time, but. Okay, this isn't the best paint job, but it demonstrates the point of what I'm trying to talk about here. Always pull your maskings back over itself. So nothing lifted, nothing popped off. But you can see right in here, I did a little, just put a nice edge on this, and you can pass it around later when it's still a little wet, but it's got to dry. But You know, the mass edge is crisp and sharp, no buildup, no nothing. So I'm super happy with all that. And then over here, I just did a little freehand, just kind of a shape. There's almost no overspray at all. It's that nice. So
ja, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Ich hoffe, ihr konntet etwas Inspiration mitnehmen und Anregung. Und ja, seid schon gespannt auf den zweiten Teil, wo es um die Alterung mit Ölfarben und mit Pigmenten geht. Ist sehr spannend, lohnt sich auf jeden Fall zuzugucken. Und falls ihr nichts von uns verpassen wollt, dann abonniert doch einfach unseren Kanal und ihr seid immer auf den Neuesten. Wir planen Reviews, Vorstellungen von Bausätzen und noch viele andere Sachen. Na, wir sehen uns bis dahin. Ciao, ciao.